would shape her transformation as a nation. But it would create an irreparable rift with the Soviet Union, one that would break out into open war. For so long, China's bitter rivalry with the Soviet Union has been shrouded in secrecy. Now, eyewitness accounts from PLA soldiers reveal a conflict that has been brewing since the beginning of the Sino-Soviet alliance. This is the untold story of Mao's Cold War with the Soviet Union.
Hi everyone, welcome to this
This is the untold story of Mao's Cold War with the Soviet Union.
It's the summer of 1978. A woman with horrific pustules all over her body is lying in a hospital isolation bed in severe pain. Doctors wearing thick rubber gloves cautiously approach, they being the only people in the world allowed near her. After losing sight in one eye and losing her mind, she dies. The date was September 11th. Soon after, there was a funeral, but no one was allowed to attend. That's because she died from smallpox, a disease that had been long since wiped out in England. How did that happen? The answer is a lab leak. And as you'll see today, similar leaks have caused absolute mayhem in the world, including the deadly anthrax leak now known as biological Chernobyl. That is one utterly terrifying story, and we'll tell you about it in all its gory detail. But first, the woman who died such a lonely death was named Janet Parker, and she was the last person to die from smallpox in the UK. In fact, she was the last in the entire world. Parker was a medical photographer working with the University of Birmingham Medical School. As researchers worked with the smallpox down in the labs, she'd be up in her darkroom developing her photos. The disease might have been eradicated in the country, but that didn't mean research stopped. That's why when she started feeling ill on August 11th of that year, she didn't even consider it being smallpox. She told her doctor that she had a headache, and then when he looked her over, he saw that she had red spots covering parts of her body. His first thought was chickenpox. Not only was smallpox a thing of the past, but Parker had actually been vaccinated against the disease, albeit back in '66. But when her muscles started aching and her spots turned into a horrific rash now covering the soles of her feet, her legs, and elsewhere, doctors knew this was trouble. She was whisked off to the hospital, after which she was given a diagnosis of variola major, which is the worst type of smallpox. The worrying thing was this was a highly contagious disease, and Parker had been near a lot of people in the short time that she was ill. First, her parents went into quarantine, but after an investigation it was thought that about 500 people had been close to her. They were all placed in quarantine and vaccinated, while health specialists fumigated all the places where Parker had been. One of those people was her mother, and in spite of her being vaccinated, she also got the disease. Thankfully, she didn't seem to have a major strain. But then Parker's father died while in hospital quarantine. It was thought he actually died from a heart attack just after seeing his daughter on her deathbed. But an autopsy couldn't be done because of the risk of him having smallpox and infecting someone else. But the question on everyone's mind was, how did she contract the virus in the first place? Surely if she had gotten it, there had to be a leak and someone else might have gotten it. As officials were pondering the question, Parker started getting much worse. She went blind in one eye, and then one day, seemingly not knowing what was happening to her, she tried to clamber out of bed and rip out the drip in her arm. She died soon after. This was so serious that no one could attend her funeral. It was, as the press called it, the loneliest kind of death. But such strict measures had to be taken. In the 20th century, the disease is thought to have killed around 300 million people. But as it's an ancient disease, God knows how many has felled throughout history. The origin of smallpox is unknown, but it's thought to go back around 3,000 years. Pharaoh Ramses V died from it in 1157 BC. In the recent past, when there was an outbreak, something like 20 to 30% of infected people died. Even if the victims survived, they were often blinded or left horribly disfigured. So when it made an appearance in 1978, when it was thought to have been wiped out all over the world, you can be sure people in England and elsewhere were somewhat in a tiz. As one professor later remarked, very quickly, national and then international press appeared. This was a major worldwide issue. One of the doctors who was responsible for the lab where it came from wrote a letter saying, "I'm sorry to have misplaced the trust which so many of my friends and colleagues have placed in me and my work." He died soon after, not from smallpox. But was it all his fault? No one really knows. Investigations said it definitely had leaked from the lab somehow. How, they don't know. But the hypothesis was that it could have come through an air vent, gotten onto equipment Parker had touched, or from an actual contaminated person. We guess not many of our viewers were born when this happened, but suffice it to say, the news was about as bad as news gets. In the end, everything turned out all right except for that one tragedy. And of course, the tragedy of family members losing a beloved. In 1980, the WHO announced that the disease was gone from the world for good. Maybe. We added the maybe. Prior to that, the last known smallpox lab leak happened in 1971 when scores of people got it while working at a secret facility in the Soviet Union where biological weapons were the name of the game. This became known as the 1971 Aral smallpox incident. A Russian researcher later wrote, on Vozrozhdenia Island in the Aral Sea, the strongest recipes of smallpox were tested. Suddenly I was informed that there were mysterious cases of mortalities on Aralsk. He said that a young scientist had been aboard a ship and strayed too close to the island and then somehow got the virus. No one exactly knows how. Though she'd been vaccinated, she still got ill. She also took the virus back home where she infected more people. She recovered, but out of 9 folks who were infected, 3 died. One of them was her little brother. 50,000 residents were subsequently vaccinated, and many people had to go into quarantine. Whatever went on in that lab on the island, we may never know. But even though it was abandoned a long time ago, strange things have happened in the waters surrounding the island. The BBC reported that tons of dead fish once appeared in the water, while one time 2 fishermen were found dead in their boat. It's thought they contracted the plague. Even more scary, one day 50,000 antelope grazing nearby just dropped down dead. All of them died within the space of an hour. This place has been dubbed Anthrax Island, with the BBC stating, over the years the site flourished into a living nightmare, where anthrax, smallpox, and the plague hung in great clouds over the land. And exotic diseases such as tularemia, brucellosis, and typhus rained down and seeped into the sandy soil. We'll come back to anthrax and a tale straight out of a horror movie, but first, there's probably no disease that scares people as much as the dreaded Ebola virus. That's something we would hope never gets leaked from a lab. Well, it has in the past. While Ebola can be deadly, it doesn't make people look like zombies, as many fake images on the internet seem to suggest. But when you hear that it kills human cells and can make them explode, thereby wreaking havoc on the immune system and making people bleed from the inside, well, that's scary enough without the fake news. This is why people work with it in labs so they can make vaccines. But sometimes things go wrong. Handling viruses, them being invisible and all, isn't like fiddling around with a bunch of Lego bricks. There were news reports in 2009 that a woman working at Bernard Nocht Institute for Tropical Medicine in Hamburg got infected with Ebola by accident. The good news is that she was given a vaccine shortly after, and she was okay except for having a high fever. Her name was never given to the press because, hey, it's not cool to have your name associated with Ebola. It was said that she was working with the virus when she pricked herself with a needle, and we don't know much more than that. When people contract Ebola, they have a 50 to 90% chance of biting the dust. There's no cure yet, so victims just have to hope their immune system kicks into action and does the job it's supposed to. Unfortunately, this didn't happen to a Russian scientist who'd accidentally pricked herself with a needle back in 2004. Her name was Antonina Presniakova. Every effort was made to save her life, but those efforts failed. All the people involved in trying to save her, of course, had to wear protective clothing and then be sent to quarantine. Maybe some of you are now thinking, well, that'll never happen to me. Others might be thinking, didn't COVID come from a lab? The answer to that still remains a mystery, although as we write this, the New York Times has a story doing the rounds with the title, "You Should Be Afraid of the Next Lab Leak." The article said when someone works in one of those high-level labs, the safety protocols are incredibly strict. This is how one guy's entrance to the lab was described. He carefully dons a pair of gloves, puts on the hooded suit with gloves attached to it, and then adds yet another pair of gloves. After a hose from a ceiling pipe is connected to a valve on his suit, you inflate like the Michelin Man, he said. He passes through an airlock and into his lab. But errors can happen, and if they do happen, such as a suit has the tiniest tear in it, the outcome could be incredibly bleak. It's not like forgetting to turn off the oven. Take, for example, the incident that happened at a lab in China in which severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, escaped not once, but twice in 2004. A spokesperson for the WHO explained, "We suspect 2 people, a 26-year-old female postgraduate student and a 31-year-old male postdoc, were both infected, apparently in 2 separate incidents." How did this happen? We actually don't know because China isn't telling, but we do know that the incidents happened 2 weeks apart. This was especially worrying because foreigners had worked in the same lab and later got on a plane and then went back home. In the end, hundreds of people were tested, and had to be isolated, but it seems that it still infected another 7 people outside of the lab. No one died, which is fortunate, seeing as the fatality rate for SARS is somewhere between 11 and 14%. But the question remains, how did it leak? It was never found out, although one SARS expert said the lab might have had all the right rules, but the people may not comply. For example, notebooks are not supposed to be taken out, a lot of things like that. A virus doesn't jump on people. Since the SARS outbreak in 2003, there have been 6 different lab leaks, although it seems that none of them have been too serious. We did find at least 1 fatality though. Let's just hope human error in those labs doesn't happen much more. It's almost always that, with Bloomberg writing that when a leak happened in a Taiwanese lab, it was down to botched decontamination of laboratory waste. It only takes one mistake though, and if it's ever proved that COVID was leaked from a lab, well, just look at the havoc that it's caused all over the world. But now let's talk about anthrax. We know you are dying to hear that anthrax story. One time that was leaked, and the outcome was very grim indeed. First of all, the reason why the place we talked about earlier was nicknamed Anthrax Island was because vast amounts of the stuff was put on barges in 1988 and transported there. We're talking up to about 200 tons of it. This is not the kind of place you want to go on your vacation. The Nenets tribe in Russia knows all about that, since 72 of them were not long ago infected with anthrax near where they lived, in the town of Salakhard, close to the Arctic Circle. 2,300 reindeer died as a result, but there was only 1 human death as well as many hospitalizations. The reason it happened was said to be down to global warming and the ice melting. The bacterium was in animal bones that had been buried for a long time, but they came back to the surface when unusually warm temperatures caused a thaw. The worst symptoms of anthrax have been described like this: inflammation of the membranes and fluid covering the brain and spinal cord, leading to massive bleeding, hemorrhagic meningitis, and death. There are 3 types of anthrax, and fatality rates differ for each one. Those 3 types affect the skin, cutaneous, the lungs, inhalation, and the digestive system, gastrointestinal. The first has only a 1% fatality rate if treated and 20% if untreated. The second has a fatality rate of 20 to 60%, and the third, a 75% fatality rate even if the infected has sought treatment. As you know, it comes from animals, but another reason for getting anthrax is because someone made it as a biological weapon. That's what happened in 1979 in an event sometimes called the Biological Chernobyl. The Soviet Union at the time was developing biological weapons at a military research facility in the city of Sverdlovsk. This was all hush-hush, of course, and when the leak happened, the Soviet authorities said it was down to contaminated meat. That was a huge lie, a lie about an event that killed many people. At first, the doctors saw that there was a sudden influx of people who had pneumonia, and there was no good reason for it. Within a week, dozens of them were dead. American spies were over in Russia at the time, and word got back to the US, and then the Soviets had some explaining to do. Their answer to the riddle was that those people must have eaten contaminated meat. That's how the story stayed for about a decade, after which the truth came out. The 66 people that died had met their end because there had been a lab leak of anthrax. It was discovered that scientists had been working on an anthrax biological weapon at Compound 19 in the Special Zone when the wind blew the anthrax spores and they traveled to nearby villages. Russian researchers later said that there was a defect in the system which carried the contaminated air to the exhaust and then outside. One woman who got sick worked at a ceramics factory near the lab. One day she went into work and her boss asked her, "Why is it that your hands are blue?" That was probably because she had low blood oxygen level. She was rushed to the hospital where she spent 3 whole weeks unconscious. By the time she came around, 18 of her friends at the same factory had already given up the ghost. She survived, but when she was well enough to sit up, the KGB visited her and made her sign a form that stated she'd be in serious trouble if she talked about the incident for a quarter of a century to come. Soviet scientists, of course, knew that this was no food contamination event, but times being the way they were, they didn't exactly voice their thoughts. One of them later said the task was to defend the honor of the country. US researchers said that the Russians weren't trying to create a vaccine-resistant strain of anthrax, with one of them saying that doesn't mean it wasn't nasty. It was extracted from the people who were killed by it. The New York Times did a story on this not long ago, which was where we got the Blue Hand story from. The article also said that this anthrax leak incident proves that authoritarian governments can suppress the truth for quite a long time. And if they could do that then, could they do that now? Now you really need to watch Diseases That Will Kill You the Quickest, or listen to some very strange stories in Weirdest Brain Disorders. The great Mahatma Gandhi, a hero of India, a man who, through a campaign of non-violence, freed his country from the clutches of British imperialists. He was not just a father of his nation, but for some, he was considered almost saintly. He also liked to sleep alone in beds with his grandnieces and other young women, and held some shockingly racist views toward other races. Today, we'll shock some of you. We might even offend some of you. But we also think by the time we got to the end of this show, you will have also changed your mind as to how you think about Mr. Gandhi. Before we get to that, here's an abridged introduction to the man born Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi on October 2, 1869. He grew up in fairly comfortable surroundings, seeing that his father held the position of chief minister of the Indian state of Porbandar. His mother was said to be a very pious woman, which is where the young Gandhi discovered the beliefs of cherishing the simple things in life. The religious devotion he saw by his mother would foster in him a sense of ethics that he later became famous for on a global scale. Things such as nonviolence, tolerance of others' beliefs, vegetarianism, and acts of self-purification were his badge. They were also steeped in hypocrisy at times. His beliefs were put to the test when he went over to London to study. Before he left India, he swore to his mom to not fall for the enticements of modern life, to stay clear of women and meat, and generally to uphold the beliefs she taught him. But while studying law in London, he witnessed late 19th century industry and all the horrors that could come with it. The streets of London were certainly not paved with gold. Far from it, many Londoners with their ragged clothes and dirty faces didn't seem to be enjoying Britain's industrial wealth. Gandhi witnessed poverty, but he also witnessed activism there. It was the same when he went over to South Africa, where he saw much of the population living in abject poverty. Gandhi might have been an educated lawyer by this time, but that didn't mean he wasn't told, like other Indians, that because of his skin color, he wasn't allowed to walk on certain footpaths or enter certain buildings. There's more to this story, but let us just tell you the good Gandhi story first. He was disgusted. There he was, an educated man who considered himself as much English as he was Indian, but treated as a second-class citizen by the Europeans. One time, he was kicked out of a train coach because of his race. Like many other people of color, his rights were taken away from him. On other occasions, he was beaten up for not making room for a white passenger. If that wasn't bad enough, he was barred for staying at certain hotels, even though he had the money to pay for them. The story goes that Gandhi understood the many wrongs committed by the imperialists, and so it was at this juncture in his life when he decided he was going to bring about change. But his resistance, in line with his religious beliefs, had to be peaceful. One of the most famous lines is, "Every revolution begins with a single act of defiance." And this is how he began fighting for the rights of Indians. This is how he got a name for himself as an activist, which on one dark day in Durban, South Africa, almost got him lynched by a mob of angry white folks. He spent several years in South Africa, but he knew that India needed him. When he announced his departure from Africa, a statesman wrote, "The saint has left our shores." This statesman was a white South African. He finished the sentence, "I hope forever." Back in India, Gandhi carried on fighting for people's rights. He'd been beaten up, he'd been jailed, he'd been harangued and oppressed, and he still preached peace. He might have supported the British war effort, but he also never shied away from criticizing the British imperialists. We apologize to our Gandhi enthusiasts for skipping over many years of his life, but we think most of you know that this man became one of the most powerful people in India. His form of Indian nationalism was embraced by much of the country, most of the country in fact, and they started to believe that with the right will, the Indian people could be free of the British. His activism got him arrested on March 10, 1922, and he spent the next 2 years behind bars, but he wasn't done by any means. In the years to follow, he would lead many of the Indian people to peacefully revolt against many facets of the British rule. His followers, and there were many, went to prison for their acts of civil disobedience. In 1932, while in prison again, he undertook a now famous fast over the disenfranchisement of those at the bottom of India's caste system, people called the Untouchables. When Indians saw how willing Gandhi was to die for his people, for the rights of the country's poorest, it spread hope through the hearts of the nation. Then the Second World War happened, and again the Indians were expected to fight for the British. But this time, the Indian National Congress wanted a form of self-government if it were to throw Indian nationals onto the battlefield. Close to 90,000 of them would eventually die, not to mention the perhaps 2.5 million total Indian casualties of war. Before the war ended, Gandhi had already started the Quit India movement. And then on August 15, 1947, India finally got its independence. Okay, so what you've just heard is the condensed story of a man who saw cruelty and unfairness in the world and wanted to do something about it. He then took considerable risks in fighting the perpetrators of those wrongs, and he made it his life's work. It's now time we got into costume and became the devil's advocate. Here's a quote for you. Hitler killed 5 million Jews. It's the greatest crime of our time, but the Jews should have offered themselves to the butcher's knife. They should have thrown themselves into the sea from cliffs. It would have aroused the world and the people of Germany. As it is, they succumbed anyway in their millions. Yes, those were the thoughts of Gandhi. He was taking nonviolence to another level, and he was not surprisingly condemned for saying such things. While his belief might not exactly fall into an ugly truth category, his moral absolutism made no sense at all to some people, especially those under attack from Germany. When the Nazis were bombing England, Gandhi seemed to think the Brits should not bother fighting back. This is what he said about that. "I would like you to lay down the arms you have as being useless for saving you or humanity. You will invite Herr Hitler and Signor Mussolini to take what they want of the countries you call your possessions. If these gentlemen choose to occupy your homes, you will vacate them. If they do not give you free passage out, you will allow yourselves, man, woman, and child, to be slaughtered, but you will refuse to owe allegiance to them." In hindsight, we all now know the many added horrors that would have occurred had governments followed Gandhi's instructions and just allowed Nazi Germany to do what it wanted. His assertion also sounds much worse when you consider some people now say that Gandhi was a racist. In 2019, in the African nation of Malawi, people were saying just that. In Ghana, that same year, a Gandhi statue was taken down at a university. You might think that's strange, given what we told you about Gandhi fighting for people's rights when he was in South Africa. Well, in Ghana, many people right now don't have much love for Gandhi, which can be seen on Twitter when folks use the hashtag #GandhiMustFall. Maybe you think it's a bit severe, but it sounds righteous enough when you know some of the racist things Gandhi wrote back when he was in Africa. For instance, he once wrote that white folks, despite their flaws, should be the predominating race in South Africa. You see, the young Gandhi, as you know, went over to England to get himself an education. It seems it was his dealings with the ruling British that convinced him that Europeans were just more civilized than the black people in Africa. We should say that he changed his entire stance in time and became an anti-racist, but it wasn't always like that. He also wrote in a letter summing up the beliefs to the British that the general belief seems to prevail in the colony that the Indians are a little better, if at all, than the savages or the natives of Africa. He absolutely thought that many Africans were savages, and he used derogatory language too when referring to black people, such as the term kafir. In 1904, he wrote another letter stating that he was upset about these people living amongst Indians, saying, "About the mixing of the Kafirs with the Indians, I must confess I feel most strongly." He wrote that as long as blacks were mixed with Indians, then diseases such as the plague would further spread. You can now understand why some people are now calling Gandhi out. They also accuse him of being a hypocrite, saying that he didn't believe in the rights of Africans at all, while also working with the British government in segregating whites from blacks. A stunning example of this is when Gandhi petitioned the colonial government in South Africa to ensure the Indian people didn't have to share the same queue as black people when they went to the post office in Durban. He didn't think it was fair that Indians couldn't queue with the whites. Some people now try to cover for Gandhi, saying he was just a product of his times, although one would think that a person of high intelligence would still have known right from wrong, even if they didn't always fight for what was right. Others now say that Gandhi was a card-carrying member of the Aryan Brotherhood, and no, we don't mean that bunch of violent, angry neo-Nazis whose pastime is smoking amphetamines and sharpening shivs. We mean the Brotherhood that wore suits and smoked pipes in dingy boardrooms. For example, when asked just how racist Gandhi was, one of his new critics wrote, "Gandhi believed in the Aryan Brotherhood. This involved whites and Indians higher up than Africans on the civilized scale. To that extent, he was a racist. To the extent that he wrote Africans out of history or was keen to join with whites in their subjugation, he was a racist." As we say, Gandhi shifted his stance, but how much he shifted we can't say. The question is, when he was telling people to lie down for the Germans, did any part of him still believe in superior races? You have to remember, when Gandhi was in South Africa, it wasn't as if black people hadn't already for years been fighting for their rights. You can't just say Gandhi was a product of the times, because he knew very well that a race of people rightly felt they were violently oppressed. When Gandhi was in England, he spent most of his time hanging out with intellectuals and the odd vegetarian, and then once he was in South Africa, he found himself having to share the same train carriages and join the same queues of a people he referred to as coolies. He hated this. That much was evident in 1906 when, during the Zulu Rebellion, Gandhi supported the British in what he termed the Revolt of the Kafirs. These people, who he pretty much believed were barbarians, he said deserved British rule because they spent most of their days in indolence and nakedness. Again, people say you have to forgive him for his foibles. They say he had his road to Damascus moment and he changed his views. Nonetheless, as his critics still point out, even if he did hold some racist views on racial hierarchies, why could he not ever refer to African people as Africans and not coolies or Kafirs? His utter lack of respect for Africans was evident when he attended a dinner party held by the British imperialist Hugh Wyndham, 4th Baron Leconfield. Gandhi was overjoyed to be seated next to some of the empire's toffs, and he quite enjoyed his aubergine cutlets and plum tart. He gave a speech about his leaving Africa, saying he hoped the Europeans of South Africa would take a humanitarian and imperial view of the Indian question. But one of his biographers pointed something else out. That was the fact that Gandhi never said any farewells to any Africans, even though he'd been in Africa. That biographer said Gandhi didn't think Africans deserved a goodbye message. We hammered this point home just a little bit, only because you have to admit that it's quite a huge deal when a human rights advocate fighting to end discrimination went along with discrimination and human rights abuses. If he was flawed in public, what about his personal life? Well, things get even more strange now. Gandhi once wrote to his son that a person who marries in order to satisfy his carnal desire is lower than even the beast. He had no time for casual sex and human relations, and he himself became celibate at age 38. He'd gotten married when he was 13 but turned away from sex later. So then why did the Guardian newspaper write that Gandhi was prone to having weird, manipulative flirtations with young unmarried women? Why also in 2021 did some people in California knock down a statue of the great man? The answer is that some people think Gandhi wasn't just hypocritical when it came to racial equality, but also in relation to his thoughts on sexual purity. When it was decided that the statue in California should be re-erected, a group called the Organization for Minorities of India was dead set against it. When asked why, a spokesperson for the group explained Gandhi was instrumental in influencing national treatment of women in India. He said, "My life is my message," and the life he modeled for the nation was one of sexually exploiting his grandnieces and many other teenage girls under the guise of performing celibacy experiments. Gandhi stands accused of being sexist, racist, and also committing creepy acts with young women. Like other spiritual leaders that have tainted the earth with their footsteps, Gandhi has been called a predator, which we don't have to tell you is a really bad look for someone touted as being a man of peace with a pure soul. Nonetheless, when people are accused of such things, we should hope there's a lot of evidence, or even some evidence, to back it up. Well, he was against birth control unless it was the kind of control that involved a man or woman taming their animal passions. Once he said if people have too much sex, they will become soft-brained, unhinged, in fact mental and moral wrecks. Then, when he was an aging man in the 30s, he asked his young grandniece to get into bed with him. He told her that it was an experiment to see if he could control his own animal passions. As bad as it looked, he didn't hide what he was doing, which was to test or further test his conquest of sexual desire. It was written that he didn't care what people thought about it. One author said, when a close disciple heard of Gandhi's experiments with celibacy, he had threatened to leave the ashram unless Gandhi rectified his predatory behavior. His choices were clearly never acceptable. These experiments not only involved his grandniece, but other young women and girls at the ashram. He never did have intercourse with them, but let's just say he really tested himself. As for how his wife felt about all this, Gandhi never seemed to show her much love. He once said he couldn't bear to look at her in the face, and is famously known for denying her life-saving drugs. He certainly took a lot of criticism for the 2-week celibacy experiments, and he still does now, just as he does for many of his more conservative beliefs regarding sex and gender. To give you an idea about those beliefs, his answer to 2 women being attacked by men in the street was for them to shave off their hair so they were no longer attractive to men. Yeah, he blamed the women for a male problem. Even once went as far as to say that a woman's menstruation cycle was actually a manifestation of the distortion of a woman's soul by her sexuality. For many people, Gandhi was a racist with a predilection for sexually focused predatory behavior. Others say, leave him alone. The man did good on the whole and can be said to have done something not many people can attest to in actually changing the world. Today, we've just played the devil's advocate, and we'll let you decide what to make of Gandhi. The darker parts of his life don't figure much when it comes to his legacy, but hey, mythologies are rarely interested in nuance. Now, you need to watch another myth-busting extravaganza, The Ugly Truth About Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa, or should we now say Saint Teresa of Calcutta, for decades was seen on TV screens around the world, tending to what she called the poorest of the poor. From San Francisco to Sydney, people's eyes filled with tears as the wizened old woman held infants in her arms and proclaimed that through the power of God Almighty she would address the many wrongs of this world and help millions whose lives had been blighted by poverty. And yet for some, their eyes only glistened with anger. Their hearts were filled only with the beat of injustice, as they saw only too clearly a dark shadow cast by a woman who was far from the angel of the gutter she was said to be. Today, we present the ugly truth. We imagine that the introduction has already nettled a few of our viewers who could and still cannot see anything like a dark side to the person who is called the patron saint of missionaries. Maybe they're well aware that this woman was outspoken about abject poverty that certain residents of India were faced with back in the day. They can recall the devastation of the 1943 famine and how millions died of starvation and disease. This was a woman who, in the name of God, promised to live among the poor and never falter from that path. Like a martyr, she would suffer her own series of illnesses, and yet she would never turn her back on the slums. Through her missions of charity, she would tend to the people whose home was the streets and whose daily bread were the scraps people threw away. She would hold out a hand to the blind, to the lepers, and to the people that society had, for the most part, made pariahs. And it's true, we don't question it, and she and her fellow missionaries held their arms out to the poor. They did indeed offer succor to the people on the edge who felt helpless and lost. For those in the last throes of life, besieged by diseases such as HIV and tuberculosis, Mother Teresa and her sisters opened their home. For those at the start of life but without parents to care for them, she built much-needed orphanages. In her own words, Mother Teresa said with her unlimited love, she would make it her life's work to protect the hungry, the naked, the homeless, the crippled, the blind, the lepers, all those people who feel unwanted, unloved, uncared for throughout society, people that have become a burden to the society and are shunned by everyone. Maybe some of you are now thinking, infographic show. You're sure walking on thin ice if you're going to start throwing digs at the paragon of human virtue. We're not even done. Teresa and her sisters, with the help of funding on tap, opened hospices and orphanages and more all over the world. By the time she was done, her missionaries of charity consisted of 4,000 sisters and 300 brothers doing good at 610 missionaries that covered much of the globe. They were helped by over 1 million workers who did anything from giving hope to orphans to handing out free soup to the homeless. So really, why should such an apogee of humanity have to take any flack? Let us now transform into the devil's advocate. As all you viewers will know, nothing in this life is cut and dried. Every story has countless other narratives running through the main narrative. Or as we're told when we're children, there are always two sides to every story. One of the first people to start talking about chinks in Mother Teresa's gilded armor was the critic Christopher Hitchens. In fact, while she was still alive, he co-wrote and hosted a documentary called Hell's Angel. Soon after that, he wrote a book, The Missionary Position, Mother Teresa in Theory and Practice. This man certainly had a bee in his bonnet when it came to the Lady of Light. The overarching critique is that Mother Teresa and her sisters received millions upon millions of dollars to do God's work and didn't do a very good job. It's important to say God's work and not just volunteer work. In fact, many people criticized her charities, saying that even with untold millions, they were run by people who could not provide adequate care. Pain relief was seldom given to anyone, and professional medical personnel were not often seen in the thrum of volunteers who didn't really know what they were doing. Still, for the public in the West who watched her on TV, they only saw a saint. For those who donated money, it was like doing good in the eyes of God. That can of course have certain benefits come Judgment Day. You see, during the medieval period, there was something called indulgences. In short, a person could buy their way out of hell, or at least get a few of their sins scratched off of God's ethereal chalkboard. Critics believed Mother Teresa was selling indulgences, and to them it was kind of a con. Here's what Hitchens said about that. This returns us to the medieval corruption of the church, which sold indulgences to the rich while preaching hellfire and continence to the poor. Mother Teresa was not a friend of the poor. She was a friend of poverty. She said that suffering was a gift from God. Hitchens said he once got to talk with her face to face, and she told him outright that she wasn't trying to get rid of poverty, that she was certainly not a social worker. Her mission was to create more Catholics in the world and expand the Catholic Church. He and others argued that she was never going to try to fix poverty or lessen some of the pains that came with it. How could she be? They said her facilities were badly run, and they did not focus on methods of poverty reduction in terms of education or empowerment of women. In 2010, long after the so-called Angel of Mercy had passed away, a writer from Forbes visited one of the missions of charity and said what she found were volunteers and other people questioning what exactly was going on down there. The article said those places had always been resistant to change and things had been done the way Mother Teresa wanted them done, which was most of the time volunteers doing jobs that they were not trained to do. The writer said, missionaries has always kept change at bay, but in a world where it is very difficult to hide behind secrecy, the number of disillusioned followers is increasing. She interviewed one of those volunteers, a guy from the United States, who went over to India to do some good. It should be mentioned here that the volunteers don't get any say in the running of the places, nor do they have any idea about all the money coming in and where it goes. This particular volunteer expressed surprise at what he first discovered over the first few days. In his own words, he said, "I was shocked to see negligence. Needles were washed in cold water and reused, and expired medicines were given to the inmates. There were people who had a chance to live if given proper care." So again, people have asked about how so much cash can do so little. But that volunteer said in no time at all he witnessed someone needlessly dying. He said another volunteer without any medical training had tried to feed a paralyzed person, but he did it wrong and that person died. He said he also saw someone having a toe amputated and not being given any kind of anesthetic. Yet another volunteer said she saw in one facility syringes run under cold water and reused, aspirin given to those with terminal cancer, and cold baths given to everyone. Mother Teresa allowed no criticism of such practices. People countered such criticism, saying, hey, these places are the home to the sick, the poor, the dying, they're not a hospital. Okay, state the naysayers, fine, but why not offer some real medical expertise with all that cash? As you'll soon see, the money donated was not exactly pennies. And what about the ones who recovered? Surely there should be some sort of rehabilitation going on to help them when they're ready to leave. One European volunteer said sometimes people left of their own accord, but other times they were forced back into the streets with no help or guidance as to how to survive. For that reason, they might soon be back. In this respect, it almost sounds like the prison system in many countries and their revolving doors. Some of them would rather not have empty beds. In the world of perpetual poverty, there's the term the charitable industrial complex. Mother Teresa had been accused of being part of that, perhaps even a lodestone. That same volunteer we just mentioned said one woman was very sick with diabetes and then she was gone. The sister said she'd been placed in another facility, but a few days later the volunteer saw her back on the streets. Still, she couldn't walk right. There are numerous reports of money being donated to certain missionaries of charity facilities, but not much of that money being seen. A German report going all the way back to 1991 said that only 7% of the donated cash actually appeared at the place it was donated to. Okay, so where is that missing money? No one knows, but Forbes points out that it's controlled by the Vatican now that Mother Teresa is resting in peace. One of the people who should know as well as anyone about what Mother Teresa did was Dr. Arup Chatterjee. He grew up in Calcutta, and while studying to be a doctor was one of the few voices shouting about the terrible state of the poor. He did this shouting from the slums. He later went over to the UK, where he said he was shocked by the British adulation of Mother Teresa. She was indeed portrayed as a saint, although when he was campaigning in the slums back in India, he said he never saw any of the sisters. He later wrote about what he called a cult of suffering, and spent much of his time trying to understand how, if at all, Mother Teresa and her gang of sisterly angels were helping the poor. He spoke with many people who worked closely with the sisters, which concluded with him writing a book, Mother Teresa, The Final Verdict. Maybe some people don't trust his verdict, but he was arguably in a very good position to deliver one. In an interview, he said, I spent months in libraries in London. I also traveled the world researching it. I followed slum dwellers, beggars, destitute children with a video camera. I interviewed hundreds of people. I stood with a video camera outside Teresa's home for hours. And his verdict was, Mother Teresa, or the idea of her great, brilliant, immutable goddess, was bogus. He talked about the sorry state of the facilities he visited, the lack of hygiene, the needless deaths, and of course the baptisms that were given to people on their deathbeds without their consent. Even worse, he said when Mother Teresa claimed her Nobel Peace Prize, she was quick to state how she'd saved the lives of tens of thousands of people in India. Well, after Chatterjee did his research, he said you could possibly give her the number 700, which isn't a lot, considering the many millions of dollars she received. His research also found that in Calcutta, the Missionaries of Charity was giving very little help in terms of food and water compared to most other charities. In some countries, help was hardly given at all, and conversion to Christianity was what was really going on. But the media loved her, of course. Many of you were likely not alive when she was, but rest assured she was hardly ever off the TV. Politicians could get brownie points for shaking her hand, while fraudsters, dictators, and other very bad people were only too happy to appear on with her before the flashing cameras. Speaking of politicians, Bill Clinton made her an honorary citizen of the US because she showed how we can make real our dreams for a just and good society. Everyone wanted a piece of her. It was as if she had received a television canonization, which Chatterjee ascribes mostly to the US media. This was happening, he says, while the most vulnerable people in India were still not getting the help they needed. The New York Times caught up with him fairly recently, and for the most part he said what we have already told you, minus the blanket stained with feces washed in the same sink used to clean dishes. He said at least nowadays the Missionaries of Charity do have medical professionals that come in, and when things are bad for people, they're taken to a hospital. Back in the day, he said he struggled to explain the myth of her to the people of Calcutta. They weren't interested when he expressed that the miracles people claimed she performed were perhaps not miracles at all. He wasn't exactly popular for his opinions. Mother Teresa was finally made a saint in 2016 for allegedly healing a man with a brain tumor. Thousands upon thousands of people around the world wept tears of joy. Chatterjee's contention that this was more hocus pocus and fell on many deaf ears in the West. He concluded his chat with the Times saying, they don't care about whether a third world city's dignity or prestige has been hampered by an Albanian nun. So obviously they may be interested in the lies and the charlatans and the fraud that's going on, but the whole story they're not interested in. On top of all of this, she was known to move with some very sketchy people, including neo-fascists in Italy and a dictatorship in Argentina whose members were later convicted of genocide and other crimes against humanity. Her friend in Haiti, Jean-Claude Duvalier, was accused of torture and genocide. She received millions from fraudster Charles Keating and flew on his private jet. In the US, this humble, modest woman only got the best medical treatment that wealthy people can buy. Support was never a bad thing for her, of course. One investigation found that the Vatican Bank, aka the Institute for the Works of Religion, had one mammoth account in her name. It's said that the account was worth billions, and had she one day just decided to make equally mammoth withdrawals, the bank would have been on its knees. If that's not enough to suspend us on this thin ice we're skating on, she was also called a racist. Well, actually a white savior type of racist who pitied a people that could not save themselves and needed her as a benefactor-in-chief. She was of course clapped on by giddy white people who thought their clapping helped those poor brown people, while not thinking too much about the details and genesis of widespread abject poverty. As for the Western media with its decades-long grandstanding of Mother Teresa, it too, say the critics, played a part in a kind of white colonialism. After her death, even NPR gave credence to her performance of a real-life bona fide miracle, writing, "Hardcore rationalists would not be likely to see such cases as evidence of a miracle, even while acknowledging they have no alternative explanation." As was soon pointed out, you don't have to be a hardcore rationalist to believe nuns don't make terminal brain abscesses disappear with a flick of a wrist. But this was all part of the myth, and it seemed almost everyone was in on it. Can you blame Mother Teresa for that? Well, in her private diary, she wrote about her doubts and emptiness and darkness. But that never stopped her forcing a ticket to heaven on people or demanding women should not have the right to make choices about their own bodies. We'll leave you with a question someone once asked her. They asked if poor people should have to endure their suffering. Her response was, "I think it's very beautiful for the poor to accept their lot, to share it with the Passion of Christ. I think the world is being much helped by the suffering of the poor people." Now, you need to watch The Exorcism of Saint Mother Teresa, or for something. How would you like to visit an island full of snakes, whose venom is so potent it dissolves human flesh? Or a government installation so top secret that if caught inside without proper ID, you'll be shot on sight? What about Walt Disney's secret club, and the only place in Disneyland where alcohol is served? This world is full of wonderful places to visit, but there's places so dangerous, so secret, and so exclusive that you will never, ever be allowed to visit. Number 13. Disney Club 33. If you've ever visited Disneyland, you know it's a wonderful place full of magic, dreams, and a super secret exclusive club for the world's elite. Oh, wait, you didn't know about Walt Disney's secret club to entertain the most powerful and influential people in the world? Well, that's clearly because you're not elite enough. Matter of fact, maybe you should quit watching this video and go back to your potato farm, peasant. But for those elite enough to be on this invite list, Disney Club 33 is a swanky upscale establishment in the heart of the most magical place on earth, which is also the only place in the park they serve the most magical drink in the world, ayahuasca, alcohol. That's right, if you're a parent and you've a hankering for a beer after 12 hours of wrangling a bunch of screaming toddlers around, then this is the spot for you. If you can get in, that is. The club is invitation only, meaning you need to know someone who's already a member in order to get an invite, and then there's that simple matter of your initiation fee, a modest $25,000 to $100,000 fee, along with your annual fee of $12,500 or $30,000 depending on your level of membership. And that's right, even within the elites there's varying levels of elite. And you don't want to be the scrub with a trash tier membership paying only $12 grand a year, do ya? Club 33 is full of all kinds of upscale swank, and though it was once briefly open to the public, it was soon made into a members-only affair. So what's inside this exclusive Disney club? Well, aside from the typical super rich stuff like paintings, sculptures, and a dining room called Le Grand Salon, there's also an animatronic bird called Alfred, the vulture, who sits atop a grandfather clock, and paintings where the subjects move around or disappear only to reappear in different paintings. Rumor has it that if you're a part of this super exclusive diamond tier, you can even have lunch with the cryogenically preserved head of Walt Disney himself. Our next place is so deadly humans are prohibited from visiting. Number 12. Snake Island. If flesh-dissolving venomous snakes sounds like your idea of a good time, then we've got some good news for you. Brazil's Ilha de Camara Grande is located just 90 miles off the Sao Paulo coast, and it looks like a tropical paradise as you approach. Then you get off your boat to discover thousands of one of the deadliest snakes in the world, the golden lancehead viper. One love bite from these beautiful snakes will have you dead in an hour, but that'll give you plenty of time to writhe in agony as the venom slowly dissolves your flesh. With a toxicity 3 times to 5 times greater than any mainland snake, it's enough to drop most smaller animals dead in seconds. The reason golden lancehead vipers evolved such potent venom is because there's no ground-level prey on the island, and instead the snakes have to feed off migratory birds who rest on the trees. These snakes have to kill and kill quickly. With up to 4,000 of them packed into one tiny island, competition for food is fierce. Visiting the island is illegal, though with a population density of 1 snake per square meter, Brazil doesn't have to work very hard to enforce that ban on visitors. Our next place no one is allowed to visit is not just deadly, it's one of the most remote on Earth. Number 11. Heard Island. If exclusive clubs or snakes just isn't your thing, maybe visiting one of the world's most remote and dangerous islands is. Heard Island is an extremely remote territory of Australia, located 2/3 of the way between Madagascar and Antarctica. While the island isn't technically illegal to visit unless you have a death wish, there's no good reason to go. Just getting to the island requires a week-long journey over some of the stormiest seas on Earth. And even if your boat isn't smashed to bits by turbulent Antarctic seas, you might end up missing the island entirely as it's covered by a dense cloud up to 360 days a year. What secrets does this real-life Skull Island hide? Well, an active volcano, for one. The moment you get off your boat, you're going to be hearing a groaning and popping of molten rock beneath your feet, ready to explode at a moment's notice. Just walking around the island can be a serious problem, with the average wind speed being up to 21 miles per hour and gusts up to an incredible 125 miles per hour. With its rocky icy surface being broken up regularly by deep crevasses, one strong gust of wind could see you plummeting to your death hundreds of feet below. As one researcher who regularly visits the island put it, if you get into trouble on Heard Island, there's nobody coming to rescue you. And that's if you even survive the boat trip there in the first place. The next stop on this list is protected by the Chinese government and is one of the world's oldest tombs. Number 10. The Tomb of Qin Shi Huang. China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, famously worked very hard to avoid death, even going so far as to drink life elixirs containing mercury and prescribed by his court magicians. While he inevitably died, as all men do, he ended up being immortalized in a completely different way. Completely forgotten by history, Qin Shi Huang's tomb laid under a large hill until 1974, when a group of farmers started digging wells near Qian and dug up a life-size terracotta soldier. Immediately, archaeologists descended on the site and made a startling discovery: a massive tomb containing up to 8,000 terracotta soldiers, each one handcrafted and completely unique from the rest. Yet while this main burial chamber is impressive given the army of soldiers, chariots, and equipment for war, the central tomb where Qin Shi Huang himself is buried has yet to be opened. The Chinese government has banned anyone from opening the tomb, with some believing that it's out of fear for damage that could be done to the relics inside. When King Tut's tomb was opened in the 1930s, the relatively primitive archaeological techniques used ended up causing great harm to the tomb itself and wiping out many opportunities to learn even more about the ancient king. It's hoped that future technologies will allow the tomb to be opened and the integrity of the artifacts and remains to be preserved for study. For us, after experiencing the year 2020, we say that China can go ahead and keep the ancient tomb of a warmongering emperor hellbent on attaining eternal life locked up forever. Our next dangerous destination is home to one of the last uncontacted people on Earth. Number 9. North Sentinel Island. Some people just want to be left alone, and that includes the Sentinelese people of India's North Sentinel Island. An extremely remote island on the South Indian Ocean, North Sentinel Island is home to one of the few remaining isolated tribes in the world, and they want to keep things that way. India initially attempted to establish formal contact with the Sentinelese, but that was quickly cancelled after it was made clear that these people wanted no part of the outside world. As if the point wasn't clear enough, it was driven home time and again as fishermen, ignoring the government ban on setting ashore the island, have been killed with spears and arrows by the natives. Just in 2018, an American missionary was killed, his body dragged to the beach so all watching would get the hint: leave us alone. The Sentinelese are violently protective of their island, to the point of threatening Indian Navy warships that wander too close during a military exercise. Regular helicopter overflights undertaken by the Indian Navy for the purpose of surveys are frequently attacked by arrows and spears, though the pilots make it a point to fly well over the reach of these primitive weapons. Sometimes, though, the Sentinelese take more proactive measures to defend their islands and have been known to give chase on dugout canoes. Rumors are that they also swim to nearby islands, at times threatening the locals there. If you're a world adventurer, perhaps sit a trip to this island out, or risk taking an arrow to the knee and going into an early retirement. The next place on our list is one of the most secretive on Earth and may contain relics from outside our home planet. Number 8. Area 51. It's the unofficial home of the Skunk Works, the world's most advanced aerospace engineering program, and where legendary aircraft such as the B-2, SR-71, and F-117 were born. It might also be holding alien bodies recovered from a crash in the 50s. Officially, it's known as Area 51. Unofficially, it has the moniker Dreamland. allegedly for the incredible aerospace projects that were developed there. The US government denied all knowledge of the existence of Area 51 until 1992, and to this day, much of what goes on there remains highly classified. What is known is that the most advanced aircraft to ever fly the Earth have all gotten their start there, and research continues to this day as airplanes with blacked-out windows fly employees to this remote site from an unmarked terminal at Las Vegas's McCarran Airport. Approaching Area 51 is all but impossible on foot, as armed guards patrol the perimeter regularly. Roadbeds and footpaths leading into the valley that hides this secret military base are all monitored with pressure sensors, while powerful infrared cameras continuously sweep the desert. Deadly force is authorized for the subdual of trespassers, and to this day, Area 51 remains the one place nobody has ever successfully infiltrated and returned to tell the tale. The next place you can't visit won't just kill you, it could kill anyone you come into contact with if you should return. Number 7. Chernobyl, Ukraine. On a cold night, April 26th of 1986, the world suffered the worst nuclear accident to date. A massive explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant would end up spreading 100 radioactive elements over 150,000 square kilometers of Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. In total, up to 200,000 people were evacuated from an area about 1,000 square miles surrounding the power plant, and the region has remained off limits and completely uninhabited. While the most dangerous elements now contaminating the site have only a half-life of about 30 years, meaning they should have been dramatically reduced in the 3 decades since the accident, researchers have discovered that these elements actually take longer than expected to decay. This means that the site will be permanently uninhabitable for several thousand years. Though, if in 4,000 years' time you're looking for a quiet neighborhood with great views of nature, Chernobyl's your ticket. The affected cities have been completely retaken by nature, and a surprising amount of wildlife is found to be thriving in the area thanks to a lack of human interference. Some locals living around the edges of the exclusion area, however, maintain that more than natural wildlife is running free in the fenced-off area, and Chernobyl has inspired many modern horror stories, films, and games. The number 6 spot on this list is off-limits for being a direct link to our most prehistoric past. Number 6. Lascaux Caves, France. In summer of 1940, the world had plenty to worry about, especially France. But for a moment, the entire world's attention was focused on a single fox's den discovered in the remote French countryside. 3 young men, all exploring the deserted den, were shocked to discover a small system of caves adorned with all forms of prehistoric artwork. The walls were adorned with many breathtakingly beautiful paintings of all manner of prehistoric animals, and along with the art, archaeologists discovered all manner of tools and jewelry that shed new light onto our prehistoric ancestors. The advanced tools discovered and the sophisticated artwork led many to rethink World War for very long. Today, the caves are protected by the French government, which considers them one of the most important cultural treasures. The next place on our list may just be the single most exclusive place on Earth, where less than a dozen people may have tread. Number 5. Ise Grand Shrine, Japan. Ise Grand Shrine is the Mecca or Calgary Hill of the Shinto faith, and the site of many pilgrims even to this day. However, nobody except for one single person is ever allowed to enter the shrine itself, and that's a member of the Japanese imperial family. Constructed to worship the sun goddess Amaterasu Omikami, the shrine has been the Shinto religion's most holy place for an estimated 2,000 years. In all this time, tradition dictated that the interior of the shrine could only be entered by its priestess and priest, a role that could only be fulfilled by a member of the Japanese imperial family. Even if you had previously served in the role, however, you may not know what the actual interior of the shrine looks like today, though, as every 20 years the entire interior is remodeled. Are you a fan of ghost hunting? Well, you might want to skip visiting the next spot on our list for your own safety. Number 4. World's Most Haunted Island. Maybe you're a modern adventurer plunging deep into places the authorities don't allow visitors, but you may want to rethink your trip to what's often called the most haunted island on Earth. The island's history for misery started early with the Romans, who used the island as a quarantine zone for those with the bubonic plague. Eventually, dead bodies were shipped to the island to be burned, resulting in a thick layer of ash that remains mixed with the soil to this day. In the 1920s, a mental asylum was established on the island, and unsurprisingly, reports of abuse and death were quick to follow. The island has drawn international attention for its notoriously sinister past, as several ghost hunting TV shows have filmed at the location. Ghost Adventurers stranded its crew on the island for 24 hours and managed to capture many strange and unexplained supernatural phenomenon and electromagnetic activity in a place lacking modern technology. Today, the Italian government is so desperate to redevelop the island that it's offered a 99-year lease on the island for cheap. Though unsurprisingly, no one seems interested in an island full of ghosts. The next place on our list is rumored to be the site of many secret U.S. government biological weapon programs. Number 3. North Brother Island. Many places on our list are islands, and for good reason. Islands are the best places to hide things you don't want the public seeing, or to keep people away. North Brother Island in the U.S. might just be one such place. Home to Riverside Hospital, New York State purchased the island as a place to treat and quarantine individuals with highly contagious diseases. Given the state of medical technology at the time, needless to say, many of these patients and some of the staff ended up dying on the island. Eventually, the hospital shut down and was abandoned until it was reopened during World War II to house military vets. A few decades later, the old hospital was once more reopened to treat and house heroin addicts, though today it remains closed and abandoned. New York has made visiting the island or trespassing illegal and threatens legal action against anyone who would make the attempt. What's more, the state routinely denies permission for media to visit the island, turning down many popular ghost hunting shows. The question is, why? What is New York State hiding on North Brother Island? Evidence of inhumane medical experiments from the past? An unknown highly infectious disease? A secret government research site? We may never know. Though a few intrepid souls who have secretly visited the island report nothing more spooky than the occasional ghost sighting and the general uneasiness that permeates the island. The next place on our list could house some of the world's greatest secrets, but you'll never get to find out. Number 2. Vatican's Secret Archives. Deep beneath Vatican City is a vault containing 53 miles of shelving, containing documents and correspondence that span back an incredible 1,200 years. This is the Vatican's Secret Archives, and one of the most important places on Earth that only a select few individuals are allowed to visit. Just to enter the archives, you have to be a member of the Catholic Church, serve in the Vatican, and be at least 75 years old. But let's say you spend your life dedicated to God, make the big move to the Vatican, find a job there, and finally hit the ripe old age of 3/4 of a century. What are you going to find in the most secret library on Earth? Well, it turns out we have a pretty good idea of what's actually inside the Vatican Secret Archive, because they're actually not even supposed to be secret at all. The word secret comes from a misunderstanding of the Latin word secretum, which means private. So the archives weren't meant to be secret from the world, as they were simply a private collection of books and correspondence owned by the Pope himself. But they might as well have been secret, as even Christian scholars are denied access until the Pope opened the archives in 1881. Since then, researchers have been meticulously poring over the documents and discovering a literal treasure trove of history. One of the most impressive pieces is a letter written from Mary, Queen of Scots, begging the Pope to intervene on her behalf as she faced execution. The full contents of the archives won't be known for years still, as the privacy concerns of the Vatican limit the size of the research staff. The extremely delicate nature of the documents themselves also further inhibits the already painstakingly slow work. So if the Catholic Church does know about the existence of aliens, we might not know for a century or more yet. Our number 1 spot is not only closed off to the public, but maybe mankind's best hope for surviving the apocalypse. Number 1. The modern Noah's Ark. Humanity faces a lot of problems in its immediate future. Everything from global warming, a nuclear war, and the secret takeover of aliens from Zeti Reticuli. Then there's always that chance of a random natural event simply wiping humanity's slate clean, such as an asteroid impact or a supervolcano eruption. Losing our technology would be bad enough, but one place in Svalbard, Norway is there to ensure we never lose the most important thing in our world, our crops. Without food, humanity could not hope to survive, and to that end, it's become increasingly important that humanity prepare for a catastrophic scenario that devastates our food crops. The Svalbard Seed Vault is basically a modern-day Noah's Ark and houses seeds from every crop grown around the world. The vault is dug several hundred feet into geologically stable sandstone in the high Arctic, so that way, in case its mechanical refrigeration units failed, the extreme cold outside would ensure the seeds remained perfectly preserved. Its developers even accounted for warmer ambient air temperatures due to global warming. Norway has planned for every contingency possible in order to ensure humanity can survive. The seeds aren't just meant to be used in the case of a global disaster though, as the seed vault can be used to help in the case of smaller disasters, such as the loss of specific crops to global pandemics. It also serves an important role as a genetic bank, holding pristine genetic samples of crops that can be regrown in the future when those same crops may have experienced genetic drift due to mutations. Security and the protection of these seeds is so serious that even the natural radiation emitted from the rock around the vault has been accounted for so that over thousands of years of storage, the seeds won't suffer much, if any, damage from long-term radiation exposure. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault isn't the only one of its kind, but it's one of the most secure and naturally protected vaults in the world. The real question is, why so many vaults though? What do the elites know about our future that we don't? Now find out who will survive the apocalypse with the most powerful families who secretly run the world. Or check out this other video instead. The day of her wedding, Heather dressed in a lilac gown with a sweetheart neckline. Her blonde hair was styled into curls and held back by a sparkling tiara. Her groom, Aaron, wore sneakers, dark slacks, and a matching plaid tie. The wedding took place under a wooden veranda in a park. During the ceremony, Heather and Aaron held hands and recited vows, promising to love, cherish, and protect and comfort each other. Afterwards, Heather's dad made a speech wishing the couple good luck. It was the day after Heather's 15th birthday. She was also 9 weeks pregnant. Her new husband was 24 years old. Heather had originally met Aaron when he and his parents came to work for the summer at her grandparents' fly fishing store in their rural Idaho town. She and Aaron spent hours hanging out and talking. One night they drank beer and hung out in Aaron's camper van. The next morning, Heather woke up disoriented, without any memory of the night before. She was upset when Aaron told her they had sex. However, she liked him, so she continued to date him. Several weeks later, Heather got sick and learned she was pregnant. Per Idaho state law, it's a felony for an adult to have sex with a minor under the age of 16. The maximum punishment for this crime is life in prison. When she found out her daughter was pregnant, Heather's mom, Lynette, who's divorced from her father and lives in Utah, called the local police and filed a report for statutory rape. Also, per Idaho state law, sex between a married couple is legal, no matter the age of the spouses. In the U.S., people must be 18 to marry. However, most states allow minors to marry under certain circumstances. The requirements vary from state to state. Heather's father, Keith, stepmother, and paternal grandparents sat down for a discussion with Aaron's family. Keith felt that the Bible advised his daughter having an abortion. Both families hoped that marriage would keep Aaron out of jail. In Idaho, at age 15, Heather would need permission from a parent to marry. Also, she'd have to go before a judge. Worried that a judge might not allow the match, Heather's family did some research. While some states asked for both parents' permission, Missouri only required one signature from a custodial guardian or parent. Also, a court clerk rather than a judge could approve a marriage. The families piled into a van and drove the 17 hours to Kansas City, Missouri. First thing Monday morning, Heather, Aaron, and Keith went to the Jackson County Courthouse. The court clerk took a copy of Aaron and Heather's IDs. Keith signed his consent for them to marry. By 10 a.m., the couple was on their way back to the hotel to get dressed up. Within a few hours, they were married. A few times, Heather had been asked if this was what she wanted, by family, by the clerk, and by the officiant that married her. Although she said yes, the truth was she was scared. She cared for Aaron and she didn't want him to get into trouble. Even during the ceremony, Heather felt incredibly unsure, but as her family had gone through a lot of trouble to arrange the marriage, she didn't feel as though she could back out. Furthermore, Heather was excited about becoming a mom and felt like she should try to make things work. After their wedding, Heather and Aaron began living in a camper van on her grandparents' property. Heather started her sophomore year of high school. Aaron, a high school dropout, struggled to find work. Within a few weeks, Heather learned she had miscarried. In fact, it happened right around the time she got married. Soon, Aaron was arrested. Lynette, angry over her ex-husband marrying off Heather behind her back, had pushed for the authorities to take action. While Idaho law allowed Heather and Aaron to have sex as husband and wife, Aaron could still be prosecuted for having sex with a minor prior to marriage. Keith was also arrested on 2 counts, injury to a child and accessory to rape. Just 6 weeks after the wedding, Heather reluctantly testified against Aaron at a pretrial hearing. Although she claimed everything was okay, her life was falling apart. With no baby, the main reason she had married was gone. She and Aaron fought a lot. He also had a dangerous temper. Also, Heather had dropped out of school when Aaron was arrested. While Aaron was out on bail, Heather continued to live with him. She found a minimum wage waitress job at a local burger joint. At home, Aaron expected her to do everything, cleaning, laundry, and cooking. Heather felt like she was his personal slave. As Aaron's case proceeded through the court, Heather was determined to stick it out. She'd made a commitment. However, Lynette hired a lawyer to annul the marriage. Just 4 months after they'd gotten married, Heather's marriage was annulled, and Lynette filed a restraining order on Heather's behalf against Aaron. Ultimately, Aaron was sentenced to 15 years with an option for parole after 3 years. He's required to undergo sex offender and substance abuse treatment. Whenever he gets out, he'll be on the sex offender registry for at least 10 years, if not more. Keith was sentenced to 4 years for felony injury of a child, but because Heather had somewhat agreed to the marriage, his sentence was suspended. Keith was instead ordered to spend 4 months in jail. As the judge handed down the sentence, he said to Keith, "Perhaps as you spend each of those 120 days in jail, you'll think about the 120 days your daughter was married to a rapist because of you." Heather moved to a suburb of Salt Lake City to live with her mom. She got a job and hopes to get her GED someday. Reflecting on the past, she can hardly believe that she was ever married at age 15. When Americans think of child brides, they generally think of some poor girl far away in a developing country. And that's true. According to the UN, in the developing world, about 1 in 9 girls are married by age 15, and 1 in 3 girls are married by age 18. However, child marriages happen in the US more often than you'd think. America is incredibly hypocritical when it comes to minors marrying. The US Department of State encourages and funds policies overseas to educate young women and prevent them from marrying so young. However, the laws to protect minors from child marriage in the US are patchy and widely vary from state to state. Currently, only 4 states, Delaware, New Jersey, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and 1 territory, the US Virgin Islands, have set the legal minimum age to wed at 18 with no exceptions allowed. Out of the 46 states that allow minors to marry, 20 states have no minimum age to marry with a parental or judicial waiver. Child marriage is most common in conservative religious communities and poor rural areas, but it can be found all across all races, socioeconomic strata, and in secular as well as religious families of different faiths. A national marriage survey in 2011 found minors involved in child marriages from Hindu, Buddhist, Catholic, Baptist, Muslim, and other faiths. Often teenage girls marry due to pressure from parents or their religious community, especially if they've gotten pregnant. One survey found that American girls in immigrant families are sometimes pressured to marry a distant relative abroad as a way of bringing him to the United States. The news program Frontline analyzed data collected by states and discovered that between 2000 and 2015, at least 200,459 minors in the U.S. were wed. It's likely the number of minors who were married during this period is far higher as the data was incomplete. Several states provided incomplete records or didn't provide records at all. Of the minors marrying, 87% were female. 67 of those who married were 17 years old, another 29% were 16, and 5% were 15 and younger. That meant 985 minors wed at 14, 6 children wed at age 12. Some states only keep data with categories such as 14 and younger, without specifying exactly how much younger some brides and grooms were. So it's not possible to know the age of the youngest children wed in America between 2000 and 2015. Other states don't track spousal ages at all. Of the minors who married, 14% married other minors, while 86% married adults. While most of the minors married adults in their 20s, there were some big age gaps. In one of the more egregious cases in 2010, a 17-year-old girl married a 65-year-old man in Idaho. Once again, the available data isn't able to provide the full picture. It doesn't include minors immigrating to the U.S. that were wed in their home country. Per a Senate report, between 2007 and 2017, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services approved more than 5,500 petitions by adults to bring minor spouses or fiancés to the U.S., and nearly 3,000 approvals for minors trying to bring in older spouses or fiancés. Girls were the minors in 95% of the cases. Several petitions included people in their 40s requesting on behalf of spouses as young as 14 or 15. Also, Frontline's report didn't include data about children wed in religious-only ceremonies or taken overseas to be married, which are 2 common situations that happen with child marriage in the U.S. 15-year-old Sarah had big plans for her future. She had just finished her freshman year of high school. She wanted to join the Reserve Officers Training Corps, or ROTC, and applied to the U.S. Air Force Academy, ultimately hoping to go to law school. But those future plans were derailed when her mom found out that a boy from school was interested in her daughter. She called her ex-husband, Sarah's father, for his input on how to handle the situation. Though conservative, Sarah's mother was open to her daughter dating. However, Sarah's father, a member of a cult-like Islamic offshoot religious group, was not. He insisted that his daughter come to California and spend the summer with him. Once in California, Sarah's father made it clear that the boy from school was forbidden and lectured her about being chaste, even though she hadn't done anything. Not long after that, Sarah's father took her to a religious conference where she was introduced to a 28-year-old man. They were married that same evening. Though the marriage was spiritual and not legal, under California law, 15-year-old Sarah could have been legally married, then with parental consent and a court order. After the wedding, Sarah's husband took her out of the U.S. to his home country, which she prefers not to identify. Sarah's mom had no idea all of this was happening, and Sarah wasn't allowed to communicate with her mom for months. After Sarah became pregnant, her husband decided that they should return to the U.S. to have the baby. The couple settled in the San Francisco Bay Area. One day, Sarah was taken on a road trip to Reno, Nevada to get legally married. Not completely understanding the legal ramifications of what she was doing, Sarah agreed to marry. In Nevada, minors as young as 16 can be married with the consent of at least one parent, and Sarah's father had consented. Feeling trapped, Sarah worked hard to get her GED. She wanted to continue her studies and her husband agreed, but continually threw roadblocks in her way. By age 19, Sarah was pregnant with her second child. After several years of careful planning, hard work, and secretly saving money, Sarah was finally able to file divorce papers while her husband was out of the U.S. on a summer visit to his home country with their children. She was 26 and had been married 10 years. Her husband fought back and kept the kids overseas. Thankfully, Sarah's in-laws arranged for her to get her children back, but Sarah's husband began a long, drawn-out legal battle. It was another 3 years before Sarah's divorce was final. Today, Sarah works with the nonprofits to change the laws regarding child marriage. So much of this story for me is how much of a struggle life was after divorcing him, she says. What people don't always think about is the major setbacks and obstacles that child marriage victims face in rebuilding their lives. Between 70 to 80% of child marriages end in divorce. Married minors are twice as likely to live in poverty and 3 times more likely to suffer domestic violence than are married adults. Girls who marry before 19 are 50% more likely than their unmarried peers to drop out of high school and 4 times less likely to graduate from college. They're more likely to suffer from mental health problems too. If a minor tries to leave their marriage, a wide variety of problems await them, including gray areas with the law. While they've entered into a legal contract, in most cases they aren't considered legal adults. This means even if they have the resources, they cannot file for divorce or sign rental leases. If they've been abused, they cannot seek protection in domestic violence shelters, which are generally for adults. In some states, if minors leave home, they're considered to be a runaway, and authorities can return them to the care of their spouse or family. Even when married minors become of age and want to leave the marriage, they often she had known for 45 minutes in an arranged marriage in her Orthodox Jewish community in New York. At age 27, Betsy was finally able to escape with her 3 young children. However, she was ill-prepared for the outside world. She was a single mother with a high school equivalency certificate, no work experience, and no money for childcare. The temporary and part-time jobs she managed to find couldn't cover her bills. Betsy received Section 8 Medicaid and food stamps. Sometimes she went without so her children could eat. Only when her youngest child reached school age was Betsy finally able to get full-time employment and gain some stability. We've talked about the problems faced when married young. Do young men experience similar issues? Yes, although there's even less data available regarding them. Early marriage often brings early fatherhood, and many young grooms are forced to drop out of school to take menial jobs to support their new families, which often creates or perpetuates a cycle of poverty. Considering the range of problems that arise from child marriages, you'd think the U.S. would be eager to change the laws. However, there's a wide range of proponents of child marriage that span the political spectrum. Religious groups believe teenage girls make better spouses because they tend to be more malleable than older women. Social conservatives argue that early marriages can reduce births out of wedlock, as well as the number of single mothers on welfare. Libertarians have defended the practice because banning it means the government intrudes on the right to marry. Critics point to the small number of minors who marry other minors. If under 18 marriage is banned, it can restrict young people in the military from receiving certain benefits. They also point out that in most states, the minor must go before a judge to get consent to marry. Thus, minors are empowered to halt the proceedings if they desire. Nonprofits that work with child marriage survivors say that child brides are under pressure and don't feel safe enough to tell a judge the truth. While a small amount of minors marrying other minors may be inconvenienced by having to wait until age 18 to get wed, a ban would serve the greater good. A nationwide ban on marriage below 18 would end statutory rape loopholes and end sanctioned predator access to minors. What's life like for teenagers in North Korea? Find our video here. Here at the Infographics Institute, we've done a number of videos about North Korea and its leader, Kim Jong-un. That's required endless cups of coffee and lots of research. Yes, Gary, the interns are still mad at you about hogging the white chocolate creamer. During our many hours of pursuing news stories about the DPRK, we began to notice something interesting. Though an article would be about something else, it would happen to mention a detail which provided insight to daily life in North Korea. We found these snapshots of ordinary moments fascinating. We wanted to dig a little deeper and try to figure out how teenage life is in North Korea. Just like everywhere else, issues of class and wealth play a role in the lives of teens in North Korea, although the gulf between the haves and have-nots is much wider than in several other countries. Aside from having lots of moolah, citizens are part of the elite when they have notable political, government, and military connections. A large part of being a teenager is figuring out your sense of style, how you like to dress, and your identity. It's not easy to do that when you live in a repressive country. You may have seen posters for allowed North Korean hairstyles on the internet. While it's not true that North Korea forces citizens to have a particular hairstyle, the government does encourage people to have state-approved hairstyles. Many teens are exposed to makeup, fashion, and a variety of hairstyles through foreign movies and music. South Korean skincare routines are popular too. Little makeup and skincare is sold in shops. Most devotees purchase their goods at the Jangmadang or local North Korean markets that sell everything from food to household products to clothing. These marketplaces also sell illegal products smuggled into the country, such as USB drives containing Western movies, music, and South Korean soap operas, as well as makeup and foreign clothes. While there are not any official appearance rules that we were able to find, North Korea places a strong emphasis on a tidy, clean, and appropriate appearance. Assuming they have the money to purchase expensive smuggled goods, in private, North Korean teens experiment with a variety of non-permanent looks. However, publicly, women wear minimal makeup such as lightly tinted lipstick, never red, because, as one defector explains, wearing red lipstick is unimaginable in North Korea because the color red represents capitalism. It's unacceptable for males to wear any makeup. Fashion is definitely a subtle form of resistance due to the widespread influence of foreign media and young citizens willing to push the boundaries. Spoken rules regarding appearance have loosened slightly. Citizens now wear brightly colored clothing, even some daring to wear jeans, and ladies fairly short skirts. However, the prevailing attitude depends on where one is in the country. Fashion acceptable in Pyongyang may not be acceptable in a small village. Wearing too much makeup, skimpy clothing, or too tight clothes might cause citizens to run afoul of the Gyu Chaldae or fashion police. The Gyu Chaldae patrol pedestrian areas, making sure that everyone's appearance is suitable. If caught with an inappropriate appearance, the fashion police issue punishments. Common punishments involve public humiliation. Offenders are made to stand in the middle of a town square and endure harsh criticism from officers. Also, short stints of hard labor and fines are also given as punishment. What's school life like for a North Korean teen? In the DPRK, education is entirely controlled by the government. Kindergarten, primary, and secondary schooling are free, and all citizens are required to attend. North Korea is surprisingly progressive when it comes to the education of women. After kindergarten, primary school, also known as the People's Schools, is attended from the ages of 6 to 9. Then from 10 to 16, pupils and the Kim family. Other commonly taught propaganda is military nationalism and Juche, or the North Korean concept of self-sufficiency. While school for city dwellers and the elite may well be funded by North Korean standards, reports have leaked out of underfunded rural schools with not enough resources and poorly trained teachers. In recent years, students have been forced to cover school costs such as workbooks or helping to heat their schools in the winter. Impoverished families have a hard time coming up with the money to pay school fees, and teens sometimes drop out. While more middle-class families are able to hire tutors for their children as an alternative to school, which can actually be cheaper than school fees, poor kids are left in the lurch. The dropouts take menial jobs to survive. The government seems to turn a blind eye to dropouts, especially since their work often provides supplemental money and food to keep poor households going. After finishing secondary school at age 17, citizens must serve in the military. Men are conscripted to the military for 10 years and women for 6 years, until age 23. Conscripts can be drafted into elite special forces depending on their social class, or if they have outstanding athletic abilities. There are exemptions to joining the military, though. Teenagers with good grades from elite families may be invited to sit for entry exams at one of the North Korean universities. If they're accepted, they may delay, shorten, or even bypass military service. Certain skilled workers and technicians may also bypass or shorten military service. Many North Korean teens don't have a lot of free time. When they aren't at school or studying, many teens work, helping their families to make ends meet. The types of jobs available to teens are mainly informal work, such as selling charcoal door to door, selling smuggled goods in the marketplace, or tutoring and childcare for younger children. During their free time, if teens are lucky enough to live in an area that has a cinema and they can afford it, you might find them at the movies. However, North Korea's cinemas only have 1 or 2 screens and often have the same few movies showing for months. Some of the larger cities have a bowling alley, arcade, or mini-golf, but it's quite expensive and the average middle-class teen may visit such places infrequently. The same for roller rinks and ice skating arenas. But they're expensive too, and since so few of them exist, they stay crowded. Teens who are in Donju or part of the 1% may receive an allowance. That may not sound like a big deal, but in a country where in 2018 the official salary is roughly $10 US a month, it is. Having an allowance makes for a great social life. Donju teens likely live in the capital of Pyongyang. They hang out at 24-hour coffee shops and drink lattes, which at $4 US a drink is incredibly out of reach of most North Korean citizens. They also frequently visit water theme parks, ski, hang out in pool bars, and have gym memberships. They may eat out both at fast food restaurants and fine dining where they eat expensive cuts of steak, an unimaginable luxury for most citizens. Like everywhere else, teens hang out with their friends in the park or at a home. They may play video games on older consoles that they've bought on the black market. Newer game systems that require online access aren't suitable as home internet access in North Korea is virtually non-existent. Friends also get together and watch foreign or often Western movies on DVD or flash drives, also purchased from smugglers. It's extremely common for North Koreans to pass around flash drives containing videos, music, and news. In fact, as a way to educate North Korea about the world, various activists and religious organizations smuggle USB sticks with subversive media into the country. North Korean teens do have to be careful who they trust and share media with. Ironically, about 2 weeks later, several K-pop bands visited Pyongyang to perform for Kim Jong-un and North Korean government officials. Ultimately, the case is a sad yet perfect illustration of how North Korea is run. Kim Jong-un and government officials at the top can do whatever they like, but they will punish ordinary citizens if they try to do the same. The repressive nature of North Korean society causes anger, depression, and disillusionment among its people. Many citizens turn to drugs and alcohol to mitigate the pain. In 2016, an institute interviewed defectors about life in North Korea. Many of the defectors said that around 30% of North Koreans, including teens, are addicted to drugs. While it's hard to gauge how accurate this claim is, in the winter of 2019, North Korea began making a concerted effort to crack down on teenage drug use, especially use of opium, which is readily available. There have been a few incidents where a roving band of high teens caused a disturbance or brawled in the street with police. North Korea's drug issues are a problem of their own making. For many years, the production of opium was a state-run industry where North Korea sold drugs on the international black market as a way to get around sanctions. Middle school students were mobilized to harvest poppies and produce opium powder on poppy farms. It was inevitable that citizens would begin to try the product. In 2013, North Korea implemented a death penalty for illicit drug manufacture. In recent years, they've also created harsh laws targeting drug runners who sell to minors. Dating in North Korea is somewhat taboo. Society, especially older people, frown upon it. Young women are expected to remain chaste, marrying young and then having lots of children for the sake of the great nation. There's no sex education taught in school. Porn is illegal, and if caught with it, a citizen will be sent to a re-education camp. College campuses have strict rules against dating. Arranged marriages are still common in North Korea, but increasingly due to the influence of foreign movies, it's becoming more common to marry for love. Teens get around society's disapproval by having group dates and assignations. When couples go out alone, there's no public display of affection. Even just holding hands is not acceptable. However, some parents turn a blind eye to their teens dating as long as they don't shame the family. Correspondence passed between sweethearts to set up dates can be tricky, especially if parents do not approve. The majority of North Koreans don't have telephones, although increasingly cell phones, especially smartphones, are popular. It's estimated that around 25% or 6 million people in North Korea have a cell phone. Locally made smartphones are popular with teens of the Donju, but as they're rumored to cost upwards of $400, rarely do ordinary citizens own them. They can't be used to call overseas or connect to the internet. Instead, they connect to the country's internal state-run intranet on 3G. Despite the intranet, for apps, North Korean smartphone users do have to visit a physical store where they can download apps approved by the North Korean government. Also, it's rumored that the government accesses them to spy on people. Recently, business has begun to boom for smugglers of Chinese-made phones. Using smuggled phones, North Koreans can not only call locally but stay in contact with relatives who have defected to South Korea. Apps such as WeChat are used to bypass having calls monitored by the Ministry of State Security. More and more, as the youth of the DPRK become aware of the outside world, they're changing North Korean society. There's only so long that Kim Jong-un is going to be able to rule with an iron fist. Now you should totally keep the watch party going. How did North Korean soldiers stack up against US? What would happen if an American soldier and a North Korean soldier found themselves face to face on the field of battle? Who would win? It would most likely come down to the soldier with the best training and equipment. Both soldiers would be well versed in combat, but who would have an edge? Let's compare an American Army soldier to a North Korean soldier from head to toe and see who might have the upper hand. Becoming a soldier is different in every country, but the path to becoming a soldier in the United States versus in North Korea are two totally different ends of the spectrum. In the United States, you can talk to a recruiter who will take you under their wing for enlistment. You're allowed to ask questions, and the recruiter is happy to discuss joining the Army in person, over the phone, or in email. The process is easy but informative. This way, you can find out if the Army is right for you. The antithesis of this process is joining the North Korean military. Every North Korean citizen must join the military. It is not optional. The US may have the most powerful military in the world, but no one is forced to serve at this moment in time. The same cannot be said for the Korean People's Army. If you're born in North Korea, you better believe at some point you'll be a soldier. After being recruited into the US Army, the soldier goes through basic combat training. All soldiers must go through this process. In the training, they learn the basics of survival and teamwork. American soldiers are put through scenarios in real-life combat situations. They must pass physical and mental challenges that will allow them to complete missions in any type of hostile environment. The American soldier is trained by veterans and military personnel who are equipped to prepare them for combat. This is to ensure that they can meet the highest standards. North Korean soldiers also go through difficult training. Unfortunately for the Korean People's Army, there are many social and economic obstacles for soldiers to overcome during basic training. Several reports have provided evidence that although the training is rigorous for North Korean soldiers, oftentimes malnourishment and corruption hinders the abilities of the soldiers to complete their training. It would seem that the trainers and teachers are oftentimes more focused on their own needs than those of their recruits. This would negatively affect a North Korean soldier's capability during a battle. Time served in each country is also vastly different. In the United States military, a soldier is required to provide service for 4 years. They can always extend their tours or rejoin after their assigned time is up, but 4 years is required once enlisted. In the North Korean military, men must serve 10 years, women serve 7 years, and if you're lucky enough to be part of Kim Jong-un's personal bodyguard, you must serve for 13 years. If you're an American soldier, the government will oftentimes support or pay for your college education after you serve. In North Korea, citizens can go to college, but the military does not provide direct assistance. Normally, a North Korean will defer military enlistment until after college, but they still must serve their country in the military regardless. This does not seem like the best incentive for the happiness or well-being of soldiers in the North Korean military. But if you're fortunate enough to go to college and get a degree, you only need to serve for 5 years. Unless you get a degree in science or engineering, then service only lasts 3 years. Apparently, it pays to be a scientist in North Korea. After basic training for a US soldier, they move into advanced individual training. This is where the soldier's skills and expertise are developed so that they can be the best soldier possible. The US Army describes this training as the time you'll learn the skills to perform your Army job. Whatever job that might be, a US Army soldier can be sure they'll receive training and guidance in their field. The same cannot be said about North Korean soldiers. They receive basic training and they are immediately assigned a detail.
How you doing? No shit. Thank you, thank you. How you guys doing? All right. Thank you very much. It's great to be in Austin, Texas. Yeah. When I do the road, I leave a wife and 2 small kids, and she's pretty attached, you know. She cries when I leave. Like, all the time. Yeah, she does. I leave, and she's like, it's gonna be hard when you're gone. And then I have to do like an acting exercise, and I'm like, it's gonna be hard for me too, you know? It's not hard. It's fun. I just did it backstage on the phone like 5 minutes ago. She's like, I'm all alone at the house. And I was like, I'm all alone out here, you know? No, I'm not. She's great. She's great. I love her. I love the kids more, but I do love her. Well, it's a different love, you know? Like, I don't want to fuck the kids, so there's a start. That's good, Tom. So, it is beyond your capacity to explain how much you end up loving your kids. It is. And like now, I'm on that side of it. So I get to be amused by people who don't have kids, who swear that they get it. That's my favorite. Like to hang out with a friend who doesn't have any kids and he's like, yeah, man, I see that you love your kids. I totally know what you're feeling because I love my dog. And I'm like, yeah. I'm not diminishing pet love. Pet love is real. Absolutely. I've had pets my entire life. It's the best. I've rescued animals. I encourage you to do it. I have a dog that I adore. But here's the difference between my love for that dog and my kids. If that dog were to hurt one of my kids, immediately and without question, I would drown that dog, all right? And I mean through yelps, like, I'd go, like that. And then I would give it to my son. I'd be like, remember when that hurt you? I killed it. And he'd be like, what the fuck am I supposed to do with this dead dog? And I go, I don't know, maybe learn to stand up for yourself so you don't have to do shit like that, all right? I know. It's a very divisive joke. It has been the entire tour. I think it sets up the audience into 2 camps, you know? People who are like, don't do the yelp. It makes it real. And then other people were like, do the yelp. That's my favorite shit, man. And you know who you are. Yeah. Dude, having kids makes you do crazy shit. I'm not even proud of some of the things I've done, all right? Last year, it was the first time I ever had somebody bully one of my kids. I didn't respond well. This is what I took my older son to a park. He was 2.5. The cutest little fucking kid. And he walks into the park, and he walks up to a playground set. And as he walks up to it, he steps on it, and an older kid, meaning 4, he goes, you can't play with that. That's mine. And I go, I'll kick your chest through your back. And he goes, what? And I go, I'll stomp you out right now. So he's crying, I'm laughing, everybody's gathered around, right? You can't do that. You can't do anything to a shitty kid. You can curse a lot around them. Not to them, that's an important distinction. Around them, and then you fantasize about them repeating it at home and getting in trouble, and that's very satisfying, all right? But, you know, you gotta put rhythm to it or they won't remember because they're just dumb fucking kids. So you gotta be like, ship his motherfucker, count my balls, lick my dick, eat my ass. And the kid will be like, what's that? Be like, go tell your mom. That's what that is. As they walk by, you can get in one accidental hit. I've tried it, but it's gotta as they're passing, you know, like that, and then they'll be like, shit, pass motherfucker. You ever meet somebody and they're so boring, you feel like they poisoned you? Like, you're talking to them and you're like, I feel like I'm dying right now. And I think you did it. This guy's name is Craig. I met him, I made sure to get it. I was like, I'm gonna remember you for the rest of my life, man. I met him at the bank. Is he a bank teller? No. Is he a security guard? Nope. What's his job? I don't know, whatever they call that guy that stands in the lobby of banks now, where you walk in and you're like, do you work here? And he's like, I think so. That guy? The lobby liaison? Well, I saw him, we made eye contact. I don't know how you work. For me, if we make eye contact during the day, not at night, but during the day, out of human decency, I acknowledge you. So that's what I did. We made eye contact, and I go, how you doing? And he went. And I was like, okay. He goes, yeah. I go, I'd like to. And he goes, go for it. And I was like, okay, thanks. And then I reach back, and he goes, I'm going to Virginia next week. Are you telling me that? He goes, you said, how you doing when you got here? I had to think about it. That's what I'm doing. I go, that's the craziest shit I've ever heard anybody say. And also not how that question works, but all right. And now I reach back, and he goes, yeah, my sister lives there. And I'm like, how long she lived there? Now I'm roped in. He goes, 15 years. And I go, you've never been? And he goes, Now I'm starting to look at him like, hey man, do you drive to work or does somebody drop you off? You know what I mean? I think he could. Yeah. I think he could see it in my face because out of nowhere he goes, I drive. And I was like, that's cool, man. That's cool. I drive too, that's crazy. I gotta get in here. He goes, yeah, we're gonna check out DC and we're gonna see some monuments. I go, I would love to hear about it, but I have to make a deposit. He goes, well, I'll be here when you walk out. I go, you motherfucker. Fuck that guy, and fuck everybody like him. If you have the audacity to tell people how you're doing when they say, how you doing, that shit is rude and selfish, all right? I'm serious. There are two acceptable answers to how you're doing. Fine and great. And if you're miserable, you say fine. You don't burden people with your real world problems during a courteous exchange. Yeah. Sure. You know why? Because nobody wants to hear your problems. Your problems make my dick soft. And I am trying to stay hard out here. Now, you know who's got a good system going on? Rodrigo Duterte, the president of the Philippines. Yeah, well, if you're not aware, the president of the Philippines is a super cool guy. And no arrest, no trial. Who does he do it to? Drug dealers and suspected drug users. Suspected. Do you know how many tired people die every day in Manila? Isn't that crazy to you? You could walk out of your house at 5 in the morning like, oh, shit. And then you hear, you're like, oh. I'm up. And they just roll up next to you. You high? You're like, I just got up. And they're like, you're high. Pow, kill you. It's horrific. It's reprehensible, and I hope that we adopt it here. Not for drug usage, obviously. I think we should reserve it for people who have public speakerphone conversations with their phones in front of their face like this. You know? Yeah. Who are these people just walking around oblivious to the world around them? You're waiting in line to buy a coffee, you have to hear a fascinating two-way tale amplified. It's always like, where were you last night? About that? How about that? I was higher. I was high. I was just slice her fucking throat, right in line. Kick the body, have a coffee. So, too violent? I get it. So, you know whose balls I'd love to slam in a mailbox for 20 minutes straight? Grown men who board 6 a.m. flights who have never seen clouds before. I don't know if you've ever had the good fortune of boarding an early morning flight where there's an unspoken agreement, we're gonna keep it nice and dark so we can rest along the journey, but there's always some TikTok in 16C. Yeah. One guy who's sitting there who's like, I never see a cloud like that. Oh, there's another one right there. What, are you fucking 4? Shut the shade, tit slap. We're trying to get some rest. And people who put stick figures and the names of the family members on the rear windshields of their car. They be publicly executed in their car so we can keep score on the window, you know? Isn't that insane to you? Don't you have any protective instincts? I mean, it's crazy. You pull up at a random red light and the car in front of you is like, it's funny that you didn't ask. But inside are mommy and daddy and Brian and Marissa. And there's a soccer ball next to Brian because Brian loves soccer. Oh. Does Brian love getting molested? Because you put his name and favorite thing out there as bait to society. Are you out of your goddamn mind? Why don't you put your home address and his daily schedule right fucking next to it? Brian's up at 6, home at 1, bath at 7. Come over if you want to join us. It's not okay. Guys, have you ever thought about how many times you may have slept with your significant other? You should know the answer, so let me just start there, all right? If you do, that's terrifying, and we'd like you to leave. Yeah, if you're sitting here, you're like, oh, finally, somebody has... How many times your dad has really has. And look, I'm here to defend her, all right? It is not her fault. It's your dad's fault, for sure. Your dad, with all due respect, is kind of a piece of shit. A little bit. And if you're like, not my dad, he's good. Yeah, to you. He's not always like that to your mom. If they've been together 3 decades, you don't think he says some off-colored shit every now and then? Of course he does. They're laying in bed, your dad's tossing and turning, he can't sleep. And your poor mother, is everything all right, dear? It's fine. Was supper good? Yeah, shut up, I'm trying to sleep. Can I do anything to help? Yeah, you can lick my balls, all right? And you want to know something? Your poor mother, she does it, all right? Because she's a ball hog, so your mom gets down there. And she goes, I like my life. Oh, your mom. Now, your grandma. Think about some of the things that she's done. On the railroad tracks or wherever she used to fuck around. El Paso, I don't know. You're like, why are you saying this stuff, Tom? Because I'm having fun. Because I enjoy upsetting people. Yeah, I don't know what it says about me psychologically, but there is, I don't know, there's like a marching band inside of me right now going, good job, good job. Yeah. Because internally I picture somebody out there going like, I was having fun until he talked about my slut mom. And it makes me happy. I don't know. It'll upset somebody and they'll try to tell me. I say they'll try to tell me because they'll send me a message that I'll never read. And no, I used to. I used to read them all. And I took me that for a long time, you know, and I wish I had known that because, I mean, it kind of gets to you, you know, like first time I actually got in trouble for saying something was about 5 years ago. I got in trouble for saying gypsy on television. Yeah, I didn't say anything nice about him, so let me rephrase it. The show was like, we're with you. But afterwards, they found out, and they reached out, like the president of the Gypsies sent me a message. I guess she stole someone's phone, so she sent me this message. We can tell who travels. So she sent me this message. She was like, you said the G word on I was like, huh? The G word? Well, I'm a grown man. And this is over email. She's being a real B word, so I didn't want to push her, make her a C word. You know what I mean? Where are my N words at? All right, well, look. Hey, man, it's modern comedy. Get with the program. Now, then she went on, she goes, well, just so you know, we're very proud of our ethnicity. And I was like, yeah, you should be. I mean, you have nothing else. I hope you're good at camping. Hey, I was giving her a compliment. I was saying I enjoy your ethnic pride because you've earned it. And frankly, I don't think everybody has, all right? Every group's like, we're the best. No, you're not. It's impossible for everybody to be the best. I'm serious. Every group is like, no. I mean, just as an example, okay, just to like lay this out. How many people in the room, let's say, are Italian, for instance? Okay. Now, aren't the rest of you a little sick of hearing from them? Like, right? Hey, we're the best! Fucking pasta! You're like, all right, so pasta's Chinese. Calm down. Now, well, anyways, after that, I kept reading messages, reading. And then, a little while ago, I got, in one 6-week period, 200,000 emails and messages just from the state of Louisiana over jokes that I told in a special. Now, If you don't know, I had a joke in a previous special, and yeah, it's fine. It was a very silly joke. The joke essentially was, I said, you know what? We should build a wall in this country, but we should build it around that dumb fucking state. That was my joke. Now, look, I'm so dumb, I was like, everybody will like that joke. No, they don't. Not the people you made it about. I got so many misspelled death threats, and I was like, is this Creole? What the hell are they trying to tell me? I got asked about it so much, I was on the news about it, that I just volunteer it now, okay? So here's the truth. I never would have shit on them as hard as I did if I had been to Arkansas, which I now have. What a fucking dump that place is. I think when people flush their toilets in Louisiana, it all comes up in Arkansas. It smells like broken dreams and buttholes and a little bit of barbecue. But here's what's fascinating. Most of you will never experience this, but if you ever offend a large group of people, like let's say an entire state, you end up learning a lot about them. You don't want to, but they insist. So, yeah, I know everything about Louisiana now. It's the worst. I'm like an unofficial historian on the place I least want to go to. I mean, their state motto runs through my head like it's the Dow Jones ticker all day, every day. It's Louisiana, where people smoke in their cars with their babies. And Arkansas is, you done with that baby? So, what are you gonna do with it? We're gonna eat it. Eat it. Soo-wee. Now, I also got a lot of messages from the Down syndrome community. That was fun. Here's the truth about that. People with Down syndrome write much more coherently than people from Louisiana. So, we were able to have a dialogue. And I think I've grown and matured since then. I'm serious. I think I have. I think, for instance, right now, today, I think it is both lazy and antiquated to say, are you fucking R-worded? R-E-T-A-R, you get it. And here's why. I think when I say that, what I'm trying to say is, are you an idiot? Are you an imbecile? Are you stupid? And that is not the right word for that. The right word for that is Cajun. So that's what I'm gonna start saying from now on. So fuck you again. That's my point. Now, yeah. But I'll tell you this. I want you to know something. I am not one of these comedians who goes, I don't understand why people ever get upset about anything. Like the dumbest perspective you can have. I totally understand. I think you have a right to be offended by whatever offends you. And I think you have a right to express it. I do not think, however, that you have a right to expect anyone to do anything about it. Yeah. Just like if you express any of your other feelings. Like if you're like, I'm horny, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'd be like, wow, you got a lot of shit going on. Sounds like you need to jerk off, eat a sandwich, and take a nap. And that's on you. I mean, I'll give you a little tug to get you started, but I'm not gonna finish. And I also think I should have the right to respond, you know? Yeah, that's how it should work. I say something, you say something, I say something, and it continues. So I'll say this. I am not put out by outraged culture, okay? I'm serious. Doesn't affect me. because I deal with emotionally fragile people every day. See, I have 2 kids, and they bring me their problems. They do. And I speak to them about them. I speak to them differently than I would normally speak to you. You know, they'll come up to me, and my older one will be like, it's loud over there. And I'll be like, is it? Well, then don't go over there. He goes, okay. And I go, okay. And then I go, mwah, and I kiss him on the head. And that's how I'm gonna start speaking to adults who tell me they're offended by jokes during comedy shows. So, yeah. The best part is that you don't have to agree. That's the great thing about living in this country. You don't have to agree, but you'll know where I stand. So if you come up to me and you're like, I was deeply hurt by what you said during your ha-ha show, I'll be like, oh, were you? Well, you should never hear things you don't like. So you stay home now. Mwah. I'll kiss you on the head. That being said, do you ever wonder what kind of slave owner you would have been now? Not now. I mean, it's 1831. You're white. You live exactly where you live right now. You guys are like, we don't want to play this game. All right, well, fuck it, I'll play. I know how I would have been. I mean, I love buying cars now. I know we have 3, but look at this fucking guy. All right, well, hey, if you didn't like that joke, don't think about it. Now, women. Do you feel like you're almost equal citizens? Because you are not. Now, I'm on your side. I didn't say you shouldn't be. I said you're not, because I have eyes. You're not. You don't sense the great imbalance that we live with? Men get paid more to do the same work that you do. Advantage men. Women get mad at us for things we do in their dreams. Advantage women. Isn't that some shit? When you're at breakfast and you're like, why is she looking at me like that? She's like, you were a dick in my dream last night. And then you're like, okay, all right. You serious? I would like to apologize for what I did in your dream last night. She's like, thank you. And you're like, all right, I'm gonna get the fuck out of here. See, I think the power dynamic that we live with was set by a man, obviously. I think he was gonna make it equal. I really believe that. And I think the day he was going to set it up, he was leaving his house, and his wife stopped him at the door. And she was like, you know, you were titty fucking a brunette in my dream last night. And he was like, you know what? No. You're gonna answer the phones. That's what you're gonna do. And then he walked away. Okay. Don't accurately joke about our culture. All right. Really? That's not funny either. You don't think there's a couple of people in here right now who are like, I do answer the phones. Like, is that funny? Or Monday, she'll be like, hi, thank you for, oh, fuck him. Fuck that guy. Okay? Sometimes you witness the power imbalance play out in front of you between the genders in a grotesque fashion. Of course, when I say the genders, I am only speaking of 2 of the several hundred that now exist. I would like it to be anybody, anything they wish to be called. It is no burden on me. You can identify as a shoelace if you want to. And I will call you Zippity Zimzer if you ask me to. Do I think it's a little silly? Yeah, but so is badminton, and that's an Olympic event, you know? So here's what happened. I was shooting a movie a few months back, and one day we wrapped up kind of early from filmmaking. It was late afternoon, and I walk off set, and I notice there's a bar across the street. I go, I'm gonna walk into this bar, have a drink, go back to the hotel. Simple enough, right? I walk in, I see a woman seated at the bar doing what I can only describe as weird shit. If you're like, what do you mean, Tom? Well, I think there's a normal spectrum of behavior that you see from one seated at a bar. You know, if you see them seated there, you might see them go like this, or like, hey, or maybe even, ha ha ha. Is seated at the bar, and she's going,